Welcome back. We are talking about how Rome became a great power today, which is under the section Becoming a Republic on pages 310 to 311 in your textbook. Again, look it up on the online textbook using Chapter 11, Lesson 1. If you look on the classwork section of our Google Classroom and scroll to the bottom, you'll see there's a link to log into the textbook. And you either use your login or use the generic login I have posted there, which is p310, all caps, with the password Hoeksprung1 with a capital H on Hoeksprung. Okay, now we're going to get started talking about how Rome became such a power. Now, one of the things the Romans did is they formed a government called a republic. And this was a form of government where citizens elect their leaders. Does that sound familiar? We're going to hear an awful lot about that in the coming months as we have the big election coming up this year for president. So basically, the idea was the people, don't worry, they're going to get arms. These are the voters. They elect their leader. Now, we've talked about this when we talked about forms of government. The Greeks also had a citizen-controlled government. So some of the early Roman civilizations, you had kind of an idea of a king, but later on it went to this idea of the republic. And part of the reason why this happened was because at the early part of the creation of Rome, the Etruscans were in charge. And the Etruscans had these rulers that controlled everything. And the Romans did not like being controlled and bossed around. So they rebelled against their Etruscan rulers in 509 BC. And this is kind of the date where they talk about how Rome got started. Now, Rome would go on to use a lot of the things they learned from the Etruscans. With all the land they controlled, they had a big army. Their army was well trained and strict, and they organized their army into something called legions, which are large groups of Roman soldiers. It's about 6,000 people, and they're broken down into different sections, which allows them to be very flexible in what they're able to do. There's some videos I've shared on YouTube that talk about the organization of the military, as well as what your typical soldier would be doing. Now, typically, soldiers had a special spear. They also had these special swords. They had these big shields. They used some of the similar tactics we've talked about with the ancient Greeks, like the phalanx maneuver, where the soldiers would be in organized positions, which would allow them to protect each other with their shields. But this was one of the strengths that the Romans had. Now, this diagram right here, this gentleman, this is showing what your more modern Roman soldier would look like. So the first Roman soldiers did not have all of this equipment. Their armor was different. This is a newer form of armor called lorica segmentata, which is kind of a fancy name. But let's take a look at it. Now, the first weapon that our Roman has is something called a pilum. Now, the pilum is a spear with a point that bends. Now, the idea is, and we have our Roman gladiator right here, or not gladiator, Roman soldier right here. He has one of these spears. Now, the idea of this spear is that this piece right here is metal, this is wood. Now, if this guy throws the spear at someone, hopefully it hits them, goes through the armor, and this will bend. that will mean that this spear cannot be used against them. So the enemy can't pick up the spear and throw it back at the Romans because the point's bent and it's now useless. However, at the end of the battle, our guy can pick up the spear, they bring it to the blacksmith, and they would straighten it out. Anybody who's a Forged in Fire fan might know something about hardened steel. Well, they hardened the tip of the spear so it would go through armor, but they left this part soft so it would bend, so they'd always be able to straighten it back out. But this is an important weapon because it allowed the Roman soldiers to strike from a distance, not just poking at the people, but throwing the spear as well. Now, the Romans also had a couple other tools. They had their sword, the gladius. Now, I also have a gladius for my Roman soldier here. This is a gladius. This sword has a blade on both sides, has this kind of very simple pommel there, but it was a very effective weapon. Now, they also had a dagger form that was just a smaller version of this, but I don't have one of those for my Lego guy. Now, this guy's armor was iron and leather. It was iron plates woven into leather, like a leather undershirt, that allowed it to be very strong but very flexible, so this guy could march in it and fight very effectively. Now, our Romans also had these big special shields. As we see here, my Roman has this big rectangular shield. He's going to be able to defend himself and his comrades at arms. Now, this shield is made of wood and leather. Now, the thing with wood's very strong, but it can be heavy. Wood also does not respond well to water. It warps and falls apart. So they would have these shields with these sheets of wood, thin sheets of wood that are kind of glued together in different ways to add strength, and then wrapped in leather to give it kind of a more durable, waterproof protection. And usually there'd be some metal right here in the middle, so he could kind of, the soldier's fist would be behind that. He could kind of punch out with his shield and hit his enemies as well. But that is a quick look at the Roman military and how they became strong through their armies and their well-armed soldiers. As I said before, check out the YouTube videos I've shared to learn more about these details. All right, we'll talk again later, and we're going to talk a little bit about who ruled Rome, who took over, and who was the controlling force there. So I will talk to you later.